Intelligent talk that's sure to raise the IQ.
Here's Guy Wehman, Ben Brunson, and Frank Vernuccio inside the news.
Welcome back to our next segment of Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. This is our international segment, and want to welcome you all across the country on our affiliates that are spread out across the country. And then you might be listening to us on SoundCloud. We have a podcast there. It's the entirety of the program without any commercial interruptions. And then we are also on AUN TV and on YouTube, and you might be enjoying us there. Frank Vernuccio, top left, Ben Brunson, bottom middle. Okay, we've got some tankers coming out of Iran, and we kind of said, hey, stop. You're not supposed to be doing this, bad guys here. Ben, go.
Well, we know that Iran has been helping Venezuela, not out of any affinity for Venezuela, but out of a shared common enemy in the United States. Venezuela, under socialism, their economy is completely collapsed. It is an oil-rich country, ostensibly the wealthiest country in the world in terms of oil reserves, and yet the oil production has collapsed, and their ability to refine oil into fuel has collapsed inside Venezuela as their entire infrastructure continues to rot away. Now you have the majority of the country under blackout situations all of the time. Iran came to the rescue by offering to send refined fuels to Venezuela. The U.S. has said no to that. A couple of tankers made it through because I don't think we were prepared, but we are now prepared. And 4 tankers were seized that were leaving, were stopped that were leaving the Persian Gulf. These were not Iranian flag tankers, but they had been contracted by front companies to ship fuel to Venezuela. 1.1 million barrels of refined fuel was seized, and then the tankers were sent on their way. The Iranians protested, but then again turned around and said, well, these weren't Iranian tankers, and we don't know anything about this fuel. So the Iranians aren't going to do anything, but the companies that ship fuel around the world quickly get the message, and that particular method of getting around U.S. sanctions is going to come to a screeching halt very quickly.
You know something, Ben hit on an excellent point here, Frank, is that these companies, they got the message. And it was not long after Trump was in office that he had those 12 bombs over there when he was having dinner with Xi. People get the message. Trump's not going to be messing around. And he's always said about that Iraq war, take the oil. That is, that's the spoils of war. And that's what we should have done. And right now, I believe these 4 tankers are on their way to Houston. And that stuff is now part of us.
Although the United States, being energy independent, thanks to Donald Trump, hardly needs help from Iran at that point. One of the things that I think the Trump administration was doing, and this is a little bit of insider baseball, I believe, there's an additional danger from Iranian tankers, flagged or not. And that is, you don't need an intercontinental ballistic missile to deliver a nuclear warhead to the mainland of the United States. There was an indication some years ago that a North Korean tanker was caught in the Panama Canal with various types of weapons on board. Now, those weren't nuclear weapons, but they very well could have been. So increased surveillance by the United States Navy of these enemy tankers going around the world is something that we're going to see rising in importance. There is a deadly threat to the United States from this. It's another task for our increasingly overtasked Navy. We know that we need about 352 ships for the Navy to comply with all of its missions. We only have about 282. The Chinese are dramatically increasing their Navy. This is a real threat going forward.
Frank hit on something here, Ben. It's the delivery system of a nuclear weapon. It doesn't have to be a ballistic missile, and we saw that with 9/11. They just used, a couple of airplanes into the World Trade Center, and they could very easily hide things in these tankers, and boom.
Or put a nuclear weapon onto an airplane and fly it in. Yes, there are lots of ways the creative mind can come up with to deliver a nuclear weapon, and it highlights the core issue, which is you don't ever want a terrorist organization or a nation state like Iran, which has ill intentions and routinely preaches for the death and destruction of both Israel and the United States, both of which are routinely portrayed as satanic countries. You don't ever want them to have nuclear weapons. And that's the real moral of the story. And unfortunately, the agreement under Barack Obama, the Iranian nuclear deal, set a pathway to eventually allow Iran to legally enrich uranium in a way that would allow it to have a quick breakout toward a nuclear weapon. Donald Trump is trying to undo that, and God bless him for doing it. We can never allow Iran, as long as the mullahs run that country in particular, to have nuclear weapons.
Okay, a minute each on the Israel-UAE Accords. Ben, you had the first minute.
Well, look, this is an historic accord. It's the first time since the Camp David agreements, which were 40 years ago, that Arab countries have formalized a peace with Israel, formalized relations. These are the first Gulf states to do so. The UAE has led the charge. This is really a full normalized set of relationships. There's going to be embassies. There's already phone service now directly between the UAE and Israel. This is great news. It shows there'll be more Gulf states that come along, and lots of hints that Saudi Arabia are close to formalizing peace relationships with Israel. And it shows the shifting alliances and the fact that what has emerged in reality is an Israeli-Arab alliance against Iran. That is the real story behind this peace treaty.
Okay, Frank, your thoughts.
Just a few months after his inauguration, President Trump began a diplomatic offensive in the Middle East, highlighted by his visit in May of 2017 to Saudi Arabia. That hard work has come to fruition with the UAE-Israel deal. I think you're going to see a lot more progress based on that, assuming, of course, that the president remains president after January 20th. If we get a Biden administration, the reality of it is the Democrats have tilted heavily and inexplicably towards Iran. The UAE, the Saudi Arabia, the Gulf nations are going to be very upset, I think, if they lose the Trump administration. The progress would be totally lost if that occurs.
Well, you talk about a tease for the next segment, the election trail. Frank, good job. We're going to take a time out. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.